Hey everybody, welcome back to Friday Forum. Experience design is a field that merges multiple disciplines to create new methods of thinking and approaches to problem solving. The solutions that experience designers create can exist in countless forms throughout the world. Today, I'm very happy to introduce two people who embody this idea, using design in very different ways but to the same end, to create incredible experiences. Frank McCann is a pioneer in the field of audiovisual solutions, and his unique designs have grown his company, McCann Systems, into a widely recognized authority in experiential technologies. Chad Hutson has had a storied career in entertainment and technology and is now the president of Leviathan, a conceptual design agency that produces jaw-dropping experiential content and marketing. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Frank and Chad.
Thank you very much for that. I'm Frank McCann. McCann Systems is a hardware integration firm. McCann Systems has spent its career doing bending structures, visual structures, physical structures, glass, LED, plasma, and trying to figure out different ways to help creative firms tell their story and engage their brand. So we've kind of put ourselves in this unique industry that we've kind of developed. And you'll see some stories on the video that we put together of inspirational pieces that we didn't build or we didn't design, but I thought were pretty cool. And then we'll talk about when we move away from hardware and technology and integration and how we think about it and what we have to think about when we're trying to create. Chad is going to step in and talk about the cool stuff that makes it all pop. So Chad.
Awesome, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
No.
No.
Okay, awesome. Back up, Mike.
Back up, there we go.
Okay.
How about now?
All right, much better. So as Frank said, with Leviathan, we had started our company. We actually started off more as a broadcast production company. So we would create TV spots for the Super Bowl or TV commercials for kids' toys. Not the stuff that really excited us that much. Some of my other partners and I, we had backgrounds to do more physically based things. Whether it's trade show exhibits and museum installations or art and sculpture, even building robots and touring those as performance art. We kind of missed that element of what we had started off doing and kind of merged the two. So we kind of play in that space of putting content and interaction into physical environments and trying to do things that aren't normally done. Because you could watch a video on a TV any day. You could pull up an app on your phone anytime. But to have a special place you can go and do something that you didn't think was even possible, that's kind of our mission. And we can't do that without folks like McCann Systems to make that crazy-ass dream a reality. So I'll let Frank go ahead and take it over from here, and I'll pick back up in a little bit.
So we start this, let me turn on my microphone. So we'll start this video. So this is Patterned by Nature. This is in Raleigh, and these are 6-inch glass with LCD liquid crystal embedded in them. So each square is an actual pixel. And you can either have 3 states. Either it's transparent, it's semi-opaque, or opaque. And they are triggered individually as individual pixels. So the intent of the designer here is to create, for the mind to fill out what it's trying to show you. So if there's birds or it's water, the shapes are flowing through the whole space. We didn't do this job, but I thought this was one of my favorite projects as an inspiration. And this, again, is a great example of content, hardware, and manipulating technology to get a result like this. Simple but effective. This is a job that McCann Systems was engaged engaged by the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Rockwell Design. These are the lobby columns at the Cosmopolitan Hotel. And if you notice the way the Rockwell approached this, there's 13 feet of ceiling height, but they put mirrored ceilings and reflective floors to create a bigger illusion of height and depth. We had to create a system that allowed us to stitch all these monitors together in a portrait fashion at high resolution and have them all timed separately. So there's probably 15 racks of equipment that allow us to do this all simultaneously and seamlessly. Today we probably do an LED and not have any corners. This is Viacom, New York City. These are 14-foot LED doors, motorized, which open into a space that's beyond this, which will have more content in it. And these are pretty unique in the fact that, you know, they have to be accessible for fire and code, and we have to keep video running when we're moving the doors. So inside, then we complement them with these. These are called video blades. These each weigh a ton, and we have 14-foot sheets of solid glass adhered to the front of these blades. They can move anywhere in this room. This room is 150 feet long, so we can move those blades anywhere up and down on these trolleys and these tracks in the ceiling. So we had to engineer this thing from the core of the building. We had to weld in steel, and we had to put trucking systems up on the I-beams. So we're there when the building is getting built at the core and shell to make sure that we can support these monolithic devices. And we actually we designed that one, which was pretty simple. The content was all by Viacom, so they have their own content. This is the IAC building, Interactive Core Building in Manhattan. We were engaged by Frank Geary, the architect, and Bruce Mao, the designer, to build this wall. And this was, we built this. That video was from probably 2004, and we built that. This is a single pieces of glass, there's single height, 11 foot tall. And we had to run these glass panels down. I'm going to show you the back of it in a minute. We had to figure out how to project. Back then we didn't have LED like we do today, so we had to use projectors to do that. And mirrors. And I have some graphics after this to show how we did that. This is a job that Chad and I are currently working on, Leviathan and McCann Systems. This is a rendering to try to show some examples of content that Chad would do, for Leviathan would do, for this particular physical structure that McCann built. So before Leviathan got involved, this was done. So these blades were designed, they were being manufactured, the wall was getting built, so this is how Leviathan rendered it out. This is actual about a week ago. We were just in the middle of commissioning, and this is how the job is progressing. Sorry for the shaky video. We ought to give you, I think, Chad, you have some cleaner stuff at the end. The undertaking was phenomenal. This is another big look at this. This is beautiful. And the concept for this whole job, if you can see this retaining wall right here, this is the lobby. The architect did not want to feel like they were walking into a swimming pool with this 13-foot wall. So the idea was to get rid of that horizon line between the glass atrium and the concrete wall. So we created this vertical blades with spacing, so each gap, and as we go through the slideshow, each negative space was equal to a positive space, a video space. So although it was towering and some of these blades were 23 feet tall, you could actually see through it. So it had this sense of airiness to it, so it was very well received. So this is that Viacom project. So McCann Systems has to think about when the creatives have all these great fancy ideas and they all look great on paper and they're saying, oh yeah, we can do this. And so we have to kind of come up with a way to do it. So this is how we had to engineer the trolley systems. As you can see, so we could move these blades around this huge long room so we could combine them together in different groups for different events. So this is some of the thought that has to go into it and the structure behind it. And even when you're creating and being creative, you have to appreciate the depth of what goes into it so you can actually get better at what you do. This is the mirror system that we built 15 years ago. So there's 21 projectors bouncing off 2 mirrors and rotating an image from a landscape to a portrait so you get the height, because we didn't have any depth, as you can see. The glass, it was in a public space, so it's in a lobby, so we couldn't put a fragile or a surface that could be marked, so we created this film that was laminated between 2 sheets of low iron glass. Low iron glass is, if you ever look at glass at the edge, you'll see it can be green. So that means there's a lot of iron in it. So they make this glass, they'll float it with low iron. So we went up to a place called Rochester Industrial Glass up in upstate New York, and we asked them, could they laminate this layer inside 2 sheets of glass? They said, sure, but the lathe that they would use to polish it would get gummed up, so we had to buy a new lathe every time they did. It was incredibly complicated and expensive. So we ended up going to Switzerland. And McCann Systems is a TV company, technology firm. We like to make cool things. Now we're glass experts. So we go to Switzerland. We go to this place called Glass Troche, and they were delighted to help. We'd love to do this job. So they actually floated this glass, put that projection layer in the middle, put it on ships. We trucked it into Newark. We got trucks. We drove it over. So we're like managing this glass project. And put it all in. It looked great. Put the mirrors in, the projectors in, turned it all on. It took us a while to get all this blending correctly. We had to overlap those images. So you have an image, and then you 25% overlap the next image, and you keep overlapping. So that seam, we can blend it together. So it looks like one 150-foot image. So that's a little bit of the craziness that these content guys love to put us through. Rockwell's columns. So again, we had the reflective floor and the reflective ceiling. I thought was a great way to extend this visual up as you walk in. They have a curator at the Cosmopolitan Hotel because they are a very trendy hotel. And the curator is actually in charge of going out and commissioning different artworks for these columns. So you can stand there if you happen to be in the hotel, and you'll see different pieces from different artists come up on these columns. And some of the pretty famous artists I'm not aware of. I'm not good at the names of these. But this is a DK piece here on the right with the bubbles, and there were some other individual pieces of art that were put up on these, and they're still running today. I wanted to use this slide as a real quick example of corporate branding. This is Express Scripts in St. Louis. This is an engagement center for the world's largest pharmacy. And the design firm that came up with this came to us and asked us to help them do all this technology. You see these little trucks right here. These are on trolleys. These little conference rooms roll out of the wall. You actually have people working every day in this environment, but your potential clients are brought in here and toured through this space to work and engage with Express Scripts to come up with a proper pharmacy plan for that particular company. So this whole building is built around, it's almost like a movie set. You're walking into a real life movie, but it's all built with them in mind. We want to engage the client. We can write on the walls. We can move things around. These video walls over here, you can see they're separated. We can bring them together to make it one. We can separate it, and then we can spin it. So you can spin those, and you can have collaborative sessions all around this space. So it's a great example of how corporate America is using brand engagement to get their clients inside their space, in front of them. Instead of them going to the client, they want to get the client to them. This is an example of those blades that Chad and I are working on in Chicago. When we built this, we had to extrude our own aluminum. So now we're going after these aluminum manufacturers and buying aluminum by the pound. We had to develop a die to extrude it through. We had to build our own LED board to make a 3-inch wide blade, video blade. It's 3 inches wide by 22 foot tall. So that's never been done before, so we had to build our own video elements. So now we have to go to China and see if they can manufacture us a 3-inch wide video element. So every blade you see in that space is built on 3-inch divisible. So it's 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. And all the negative spaces are equal to that also. And you can see the milling and the processing, all the assembly we had to do here in Pennsylvania. And you end up doing all of this work, years of work, and there it is. You know, you get this at the end of the day, and it's such a refreshing thing, and a sense of accomplishment when we can say that, you know, we designed it, we thought of it, and we were able to put it together. And the building itself was pretty cool too. The architect, Getch, they had no space to put this building on this lot, so they built a cantilever building. So basically it's a 40-foot core. It comes up and it cantilevers out about another 40 foot on either side, and then it goes up 60 stories. So that building is in the corner of the Chicago River, and it's kind of over the water. So when you're up on those higher floors, you're actually over the water, and it's sitting on a little core. It's like a pencil balancing on a point. It moves about 15 feet on a windy day. And on the top floor, there's a tank of water, a couple of million gallons, and that water acts as a damper for the movement of the building. So you can think of the engineering of that. We think we're doing a great job engineering these little video blades. These guys have to keep the building from topping over. This is part of our vetting process. You know, we projected those blades on our wall in our warehouse. We built some mock-ups. We built some examples of real life scenarios of how the thing is going to look. This is like the years before we actually installed it. And then I give it over to Chad. Thank you very much, everybody.
So this is some pretty heavy stuff as far as what Frank's covering. But I'm curious how many of you actually have a focus here at VCU on experience design or experiential marketing. Oh, quite a few. Okay. And how many of you hope to someday go to work at, say, a DDB or a BBDO, one of the big ad agencies?
Or Leviathan.
Yes, thank you. I see, a hand. Okay, awesome.
Try Droga or Widening.
Oh, okay, there we go. How about Droga 5? Wyden Kennedy? Okay, all right, we're getting a few more. Because as technical as this sounds, if you want to do anything in experiential marketing, hell, if you even want to work at a major ad agency, you're going to have to understand not just the creative aspect of experiential design, but the technical as well, because otherwise you're going to come up with some crazy-ass idea that can't be done. So it's important to understand that you have to think not only as a creative, but you have to think a little bit like an architect. You have to think like an engineer. You have to think about audiovisual. You don't necessarily have to be a pro at it, but you should be experienced to it, because I've seen many an idea that was floated to a client like, yeah, we love this. How the hell are we going to do this? And this is why you need, well, it's why you need people like us, but it's also why you need to think in terms of physical space, physics, laws of physics, gravity, things like that definitely play into any kind of experiential event or installation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about more of some of the branded projects that were done, some of the ones that, like Riverside, that we're collaborating with Frank and his team on. It's definitely more of an art installation, whereas this is what we call a brand experience center. It goes by other names like Customer Experience Center, but in essence, it's a bit like a museum for a brand. They have offices set up, they have their own products there, or they have some sort of cool representation of their product. Obviously, with Airbus, they make jets, rockets, helicopters. You can't necessarily walk into an office building and expect to see those. But they have various installations set up that sort of puts you into the mood of buying a large plane, in part, but communicates their brand initiatives, where they come from, what they're about. You get a lot of inside track into their beliefs and how they will support you. Then you can also dive in and learn more about their products, but anyone could go to a website and read a briefing about a specific product. These brand experience centers actually allow you to experience that a bit more. So these are some initial concept drawings. if you guys are familiar with projection mapping, anyone? Projection mapping, heard of it? Yeah. For those of you who haven't, it's in essence taking a projector and wrapping an object in light with it, almost like you're putting a new wrapper on it, or skin. It's usually very precise, and it looks like that object is coming to life. So this white wall you see here is very sculptural, takes its cues from aerodynamics and wings, and this becomes a projection surface, and is controlled by this interactive table you see here. Some of these little portals you see, which are literally supposed to look like portals out of a spaceship almost. We call this the Oculus. You'll see that in action in a moment. And these are some of the conceptual drawings that we had of content onto the projection wall. The video does a much better job of showing what's happening. So we can't take all the credit for this. There was a pretty large team in addition to our team as a digital agency. There was a brand agency. There was a strategy agency. There was an architect. There was an exhibit fabricator. There were a lot of different players here, in addition to general contractor. And the idea of this is to impress folks in Washington, D.C., where this Experience Center was. Obviously, you have a great client in the United States government. They like to buy planes and jets and things that go boom. So this particular space, the Oculus, was inspired by real-time flight data to show how many Airbus jets would actually fly across the globe in a single day. This is all top secret stuff, so we can't show it to you, but it was a cool projection screen with a touch screen. When that experience is done, you'll actually go through this magical portal that opens up. And this takes you into another space where, in addition to this cool projection wall, which is in ambient mode for parties and receptions and such, but then once it's activated, this is where you can view the entire fleet of Airbus's products. As I mentioned, there's helicopters, there are commercial jetliners and such. You can, it's not really a deep dive. There's maybe 3 key features you can learn about each product. They're not necessarily rendered photorealistically, it's just more of a stylistic representation, but you can manipulate them on the touch screen with your hand, spin around. This can be done by a sales team, you can do it solo. And then after this experience, there's actually another more tangible exhibit with satellite components and some glider initiatives they're working on for is it solar power? Or just electrical planes, I believe. Moving on. Okay, Amon Tobin. Some of you probably never, a lot of you guys have probably never heard of Amon Tobin, but I wouldn't call him obscure. I would just say he's kind of under the mainstream, electronic musician, been around for 20 plus years. He's scored video games and films, but he also releases some great music that is very ambient in nature. So he had gone dark for a little bit and had been working on a concept album called ISIM, and he wanted to premiere the album as well as a new show at the MUTEC Festival, Electronic Music Festival in Montreal. But if you've ever seen a VJ or a DJ perform, it's a guy, it's turntables. There's nothing exciting going on there. But he was one of the first ones to really take projection mapping on tour in grand fashion. He and his team came up with this idea for, if you look at this stage, okay, that's right. Look at these slides, it's a bunch of white boxes stacked on top of each other, at least that's what it appears. But once it's activated with light, it can become not just space, but a spaceship or some kind of strange space creature. It transforms the architecture to be different objects, or it could just be a funky shaped screen. But when you have some really trippy audio like this guy creates, you need something to accompany that. So while this is not necessarily a brand-related project, you would be surprised at the companies who came to us after this project premiered. John Deere, freaking tractor company, said, we want to do this for our brand. I can show you the case study later if you want to see it. But, so this was released, fantastic tour. Oh, another cool technical detail. This is where Tobin was, it was this little cube in the middle of everything. It was covered with, or made with electrostatic glass. So when the electrostatic glass is engaged, it actually becomes a projection surface. When you turn it off, it's transparent, you can see through it. So sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. Here's the video. Lights. Spot them if you got them. Another important part of this was that projection alignment tool you saw in action a minute ago. Because when you set this up, tear it down every night, you need to have projected content that is very precisely hitting those objects, every single corner. It's kind of hard to finagle that. At least it was 6 years ago when we built this. So we had to engineer an alignment tool so that you set it up, you spend 30 minutes kind of tucking in all of the corners with an iPad, and boom, there you go. See, they did smoke it, I'm telling you.
We would call that a relief. The white object, the negative space is, we build a relief, and it's just, and that relief then we have depth and focus to it. And as we project on it, we use that canvas and we build objects around the relief. The space.
As you can see, you got some great press. Should I turn the lights on or just leave them on? Okay, I'll keep going. So how things like this relate to brands, I think as you've probably learned here at the Brand Center, brands are hungry to do the coolest things they can because audiences are more fragmented than ever. They get bored on social media. They need something to really make them say, damn. You're gonna hear the word wow a lot once you get out into the field. Like we want to wow people. We need some wow. We need something to pop. So experiential design can do that because you can actually get your hands on a product. You can associate a very positive feeling and an amazing experience with that product. Nike is great at doing this. They've done some really cool stuff. If you've heard of Rise or Rise 2.0, it was this basically a basketball court that was built using LED floors, and it's physically activated. There are sensors everywhere so that, let's say if you want to learn a basketball move, you can run this way, follow this trail of light to the right, and stop here. It's almost like a coach's, oh Frank, what's that thing called, where you do the whiteboard and you have the X's and the O's and all the paths?
Right, the whiteboard.
The whiteboard, oh, there we go, thank you.
It's very technical, we build those things.
Nice. So a digital whiteboard. And being able to learn moves and follow in the footsteps of basketball legends so that you can learn. So Nike has done this, they've done more. We did an activation for them. All right, silly question. Is everyone familiar with the term activation? Okay, just making sure. You never know. If you don't know, it's essentially a type of event to activate the brand or product. This particular one started off, interesting story. Got a brief from Nike, and it was for, they'd never really done much with Snapchat. So let's try integrating Snapchat with influencers. We can do a photo shoot or a video shoot, and we'll just kick that out into the world via Snapchat, and boom, we'll raise awareness for our winter line, which in this case was Sneaker Boot, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's part sneaker, part boot. And their Tech Pack line of jackets, which again is for winter weather. So that was the brief, and thought, wow, this is cool to be working with Nike, but not the most exciting assignment. And before we signed off with them on the call, he said, oh, by the way, if you come up with any other really cool ideas you just want to float our way, no matter how big, just, yeah, give it a shot. So we accepted that challenge, and we came up with some crazy idea of, imagine a digitally enhanced American Ninja Warrior obstacle course mixed with an art gallery. So we pitched it. This was 6 months of back and forth. They loved this huge idea, which would have cost millions of dollars. And I said, we don't have millions of dollars. You know they do, they just didn't spend it on this. So they said, shrink it down to a small budget. So we did. They said, but that's not cool enough. We know. So we met somewhere in the middle, and we call this test stride. Kind of like test ride. Here are a few snapshots of the experience here, which, oh, by the way, was originally supposed to be done in New York, and at the last minute they said, actually, let's do this in Shanghai. So we had 6 weeks to change everything, because Shanghai wanted to spend the money on this and figure out how to do it there. Here's some schematic drawings that kind of break down a little bit of what this is all about. So even though we are largely call it a content and interaction company, we had to start thinking like exhibit designers and architects to make this work. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see sort of rough diagrams, somewhat a horseshoe shaped. There are some textured hills you have to run over. There's a course here in the middle, which has a large LED screen behind it, which reflected content. I'll talk more about it in a moment. And then there's literally 2 inches of water and asphalt and manhole covers and things like this that you have to jump over in order to make it through. Then you have some flaming barrels, which were just fake flames. Of course, actually in China, I think they would have been fine with them being flamed. Their safety standards were a little bit different there. And then run around these barriers, jump over a taxi cab. There was actually a taxi cab with Illinois plates there, which was cool. And then you had this final jump to land on the finish line. But what made this interesting, besides just the obstacle course aspect, was this digital enhancement I mentioned. On this large screen, we had some branded content which reflected the different challenges and how product benefits kind of defeated that. So you have, I think the 3 product or brand tenets for sneaker boots are warmth, dryness, and traction. So each obstacle represented some of those challenges, and as you would start through the course, we'd have content that reflected one of those challenges. Let's say if it's this back area where you had to run through the water, we'd have this ice that would sort of burst up out of the ground as you ran past. And it would also track your progress. You have this sort of line that goes across that shows your progress on the course. And how that was tracked is through these little LiDAR sensors. LiDAR is laser in essence, but what LiDAR can do, because we didn't want to mount too many sensors along to just trigger motion, LiDAR would kind of draw this imaginary line across to know that, okay, anyone on the course that passes this point is safe. We can trigger content there. If they haven't made it to the next point, we need to hold off and slow it down and give these encouragement messages like, come on, keep going. But it kind of stops at this point. So anyone else who moves outside of the course, it wouldn't pick them up. So here's some of the points you see throughout. Because we had to, at the last minute, rely on another exhibit designer to fabricate this, we had to contract someone who could do the technical drawings. So we had to choose not just the idea of, okay, here's the experience someone will have going through this course, but also how to build it, what materials we're going to use, and which board's going to be weight bearing, and just stuff that's really outside of our comfort zone. But as an experiential agency, you're probably going to have to eventually overcome some of those challenges. So I'm going to stop talking quite so much and show you what became of it. This is sort of like a little highlight reel we put together for it, pretty brief. So in essence of just that interactive component, we actually had to design the environment as well. So we designed every exhibit, every display in there, and had to sort of outline the overall experience of where people would flow to and from. So most of the people who would show up here were influencers, celebrities, VIP, customers. They'd sign up at the iPad, and I forgot to mention the leaderboard. So that we had some people busting their asses. We didn't catch it on camera, but some people wiped out. It's extremely competitive. They do it over and over again. So they were having a blast, and they were competing with each other. And doing that with Nike products. Let's see what else I got. Okay. We'll wrap up with some other sides of 150 Media Stream that we were talking about earlier. So as Frank mentioned, they had come up with an awesome design for these blades and some really unique things they could do with them. And it was actually created not to show a single logo as much as the new tenants of this building really wanted. You wouldn't see a single logo anywhere. This was strictly an art installation, which for us was pretty awesome because while we love working with brands, sometimes we just don't like using their color scheme, or we don't want to show that ugly logo again. We want to make art.
But I'll mention that the architect and the developer wanted it to complement the building. So in a sense, it was a billboard for the building itself, for how cool the building was and its architectural design. And they wanted something in the installation to be not just a big rectangular video wall that had to be art and architectural.
Oh wow.
So it was a billboard for them as much as it was an art installation.
I did not know that. One thing that was also a challenge about this is they said, we want it to be an art piece, but we don't want it to be repetitive. And any of you who've dabbled in video production probably know that to create a 5-minute video, it's a bit of work. So how about 24 hours of video or 7 days a week of video? It's pretty challenging. So in order to overcome that, we actually suggested using generative content. But this way, it's not a linear video, it's something that the computer is generating in real time.
Are you familiar with generative content and the idea behind generative?
No.
So generative, I'll help, we do a little, want to turn the lights on, honey?
Oh, sure.
When we talk about kind of, when we're engaged in content, we're kind of on the hardware side, so we're looking at computers and machines and ways to get this content ingested into the systems. So generative content is you create a canvas of just a graphic, and it's manipulated by outside forces. So let's say, for instance, we put a weather vane on the roof, just something, we'll do something basically simple that could test wind speed, and we had temperature, and we had this, and then you had a graphic of just these strings that were just standing like this. All of that input that would come from the wind and the temperature would make those devices move from those exterior triggers, right? So generative it's generated constantly based on outside triggers, and those triggers can be anything. We can go get those, hold those, and we call it sometimes data mining. When it is another kind of generative content is, in the New York Times lobby in New York City, you see these little old-fashioned little crystal screens that look like old video games, those little ones you used to hold in your hand. And there's like 500 of them or something like that. And the artist wanted to create similarities between news stories from the archives of the New York Times between today and anything in their archives. So the computers would mine all of these news stories that were in the archives of the New York Times, and it would kind of find words that were the same. And then it would refresh these little screens to say, well, here's a story that was written in 1942 using, a certain term, and here's one that was written yesterday using a certain term, and how they are similar to each other. So that constantly goes on forever, mining the data in the archives of the New York Times. So data mining is like Express Scripts on the corporate side. They don't want just pictures, they want to have real data. So their SQL databases and their pharmacy, just prescription distribution and shipping and all that knowledge is in tables and numbers. So the softwares like X2O and such can go out in real time, get that data, we then packetize it, we wrap it with nice colors and graphs, and we can make it do anything we want. So we're turning numbers and spreadsheets and charts deep in the bowels of the computer systems of these corporate companies and creating these beautiful graphical representations of all this great stuff that's going on. So then when their customers walk in, they go, what is that? That's real. Like at IAC, we had a globe, and it had little lights coming off the globe of all the connection points. And if you went to ask.com, it gave you everybody who was logged in, everybody who had a shopping basket, all the activity, and where on the globe this activity was coming from. So you spun this little ball with your hand on the desk, and the globe would spin, and you could see all these data points connecting to Ask. And then you go to Lending Tree or any IAC product, and you could see real-time, real-world, graphically represented what was going on. But I think that's an interesting tie into this kind of like content.
Definitely, it's a little bit like a real-time infographic. So it's literally, from a brand perspective, you could take information that's part of their story, as he said, statistics about how products move or logistical patterns, things like that, and you can use brand colors and just good design sense and turn that into something that's almost like a moving work of art. So for this particular one, generative content really played an important role in keeping this fresh. So we, for our part, we not only acted as artists and built 12 different generative engines, some of it pulling outside data feeds and others just allowing a curator, which they do have on staff, which I think is pretty damn cool, is they can go through and essentially change the palette. It's like, you know what, I think for the holidays I'm gonna do something that's maybe holiday inspired. Let's get some greens and reds in there. And they can change not only colors, but the patterns in which things move and the shape of objects. There are some settings where you can use stock photography or video and have these sort of peekaboo moments where it might look like the blades are just simply made of glass, but suddenly they slide open in different areas and reveal these other images. So there's a lot you can do with it so that it is somewhat endless content. But even beyond that, nationally recognized artists and student artists at the local universities, their content could also be uploaded and scheduled for morning, noon, and night. It plays 24 hours, right?
24 hours
Yeah.
a day. That's the beauty of LED. When we did projection like we have here, we're showing this, back, before our ability to create high density with LEDs, we were using projectors. And projectors competing with ambient light in places like this. This glass wall above this display is another, 80 feet up. It's huge. So there's no way we could project in there because, number one, the projectors have to be super bright. We'd have to be using 30K projectors, which are 30,000 lumen projectors up to 60,000 lumen projectors. A lamp for a 30K, 60K projector is $4,000. And you get 6,000 hours maybe out of a lamp. So you get less than a year, so you can only run it part of the day. And now you'd have 10 projectors here maybe to do this. If they were white reliefs, right, and we put projectors up in the sloped ceiling, and we were projecting on these white boards to create this, we could get a version of it, but it'd be not as intense. And it would cost them $200,000 a year in lamps just to keep the image on.
It looked like crap during the day because it'd be washed out.
We washed out during the day. So one of the things that's happened over the last 5 years, and McCann has developed his own line of LED because we saw the advantages as they start to compress the gaps between these little light diodes like you see in Times Square, right? That's all LED. They're all direct view little lights. And as they make them smaller now to grains of sugar size, and they can put them tighter together, so we can now get higher resolution with super brightness, and we can create seamless screens any size we want. So that job we did at IAC, which was the glass with the rear projectors, today we could do with LED, and we can get it down to 1 millimeter between the pixels. This is actually 3 millimeters, believe it or not, and it looks great. We can get down to sub 1 millimeter now, and that can run 24/7 for 10 years, and it'll never wear. So that's the beauty of LED.
That's mostly, as far as the content goes, I think this is, I think some of the last shots. Here's some actual human beings in the room so it gives some perspective. Can't wait for this thing to actually be open to the public.
It was open. It's a funny story. I was telling Chad wasn't there for. There was an unofficial launch last night, and I was in Chicago for it. And this is just you're gonna run into this in your lives, and when you're doing a big launch or a big pitch, and it's the big day, and we had a bunch of real estate executives in, and of course our computers hit the bed right an hour before people were walking in. So we had to scramble and put up some temporary stuff and explain blah blah blah. There was so. It's going to happen, and it does happen. It's been working for 2 weeks, and it decided yesterday, there's people coming. Well, you know what? We think we're going to shut down. So that was a little stressful. But at the end of the day, the event went off great. We put up some content, and people comment how good the content looked, and I said, well, it's kind of free. It's like screensavers from the Windows desktop library. So it was, but they loved it. Sorry.
That's great duct tape. That's virtual duct tape. That's an important lesson to know, especially in any kind of experiential project, is things are going to go wrong, things are going to fail, always have a backup plan. I'm sure your instructors are doing a great job of teaching you that. So I think just to wrap up, as far as what we're talking about, even though this is very technical in nature, we're talking about art installations and such, it has everything to do with what you guys are learning in school and probably what you hope to do, whether you're working brand side or for some sort of agency. That these kind of things are probably going to cross your path. I think experiential projects are certainly growing.
They evoke emotional response. And whether you're selling a sneaker or whether it's patterned by nature with those little squares that do that whole thing, somebody walks away. I walked away with a memory about it. So that's what branding is about. Can you implant something that lasts beyond the experience? And when we do it with hardware, by making it unique and special, and so people walk away and remember that that's what this is about, you know. So it's the same thing when we do anything with branding or advertising. We work closely with the AICP, who are the Association of Independent Commercial Producers. That's the association that kind of works in these worlds. And we get great inspiration. Probably one of our best alignments we have, because I go to that Next Awards, and we do it here at the Bird Theater in Richmond. And you get some great ideas and you meet some great people, and they challenge us to be creative. So it makes us a little different of a firm because we're now engaging and meeting creatives, and it makes us a little bit more creative. So then people think we're the creatives, and we kind of go, well, yeah, we kind of are, but no, we're not. But these guys are the creatives, right? So, but we love that play, and that's why, you know, Chad and I are here today, because we need that friction, you know, between us to create a label. So you need those charges, and that's what happens. That's what we do.
Agreed. Now's the time for questions, I guess. Yes, how does this work? Do I pass the mic? Or? Okay.
How do you get clients excited about work that might take years to come to fruition?
I'll let you take that one first.
Well, this is, it's your ability to do renderings. And remember, back in one of the slides, we showed you some of those renderings that weren't actually the actual project. Your ability to represent what your ideas are and what you're trying to do in a physical space is based on how good and how realistic the rendering is. Because once they buy into that rendering and how look and how cool it is, they will do anything. And the better your rendering, the more money they'll spend, because they'll understand the detail that goes into it. You know, if it's just a pencil sketch, like I've done sketches on pieces of paper, you know, isometrics, and kind of to get the idea across, to get them interested. But you've got to migrate. This was 2 years in planning. And before we could go and start extruding our own aluminum, we had to virtually build it and make sure it could be done, you know. So getting them excited is about how you represent it passionately yourself, and the quality of your ability to show that in a rendering form when it's a real space like this.
Yeah, having a great deck really helps. We've even gone so far as to put these kind of architectural, instead of just having a flat rendering, we ported into Unreal Engine, which is a game engine, and someone a joystick, and either it's, whether they just look at it on the screen and kind of manipulate this virtual character throughout the space, or even strapping on an Oculus Rift or something along those lines, and being able to literally feel like you're in the space, that's a great sales tool as well.
There was one time I remember that I was in an architect's office with sketches, and a pitch deck showed up on the architect's desk from a creative firm. And the pitch deck showed up, and it says, please wait 10 seconds. A delivery man came into his office with a box. He opened the box, and there was a speaker in it, like one of those Bluetooth speaker thing, and he had to hit play. And when he hit play, it says, please open page 1. And it's like, so this narrator narrated him through the pitch deck. And it was just kind of a little, kind of a hook kind of thing to get them interested.
There may even be a whole class on that. Sort of like how to sell ideas. There's
timing, it's called.
Yes.
Sync.
Absolutely. Yes?
Technology moves so quickly, so there's no accounting for it. Obviously, projectors were the option back in the day, and now it's LEDs. How do you plan stylistically, though, for the future, and not turn into something that looks, you know, like our campus is horribly 1970s brutalism, which is very fashionable at the time?
The pipe and drape thing in the lobby you're talking about, those little monitors?
Well, I just mean the giant concrete edifices
Oh.
all around Richmond that are no longer stylish. How do you account for changing pace, not just content-wise, but architecturally and stylistically?
You can start that one.
You rebuild. No, there are limitations of what you can do to put lipstick on the pig, as they say. But sometimes there's only so much you can do with content when it comes to, say, projection mapping. You can activate the space, you can change the content, but technology does change rapidly. I think we have to kind of look into the near future and figure out what is cutting edge now that might be more commonplace 3 to 5 years from now, and might be dated in 10, but it's kind of the best you can do. If you are a brand or like a property that wants to remain relevant with the times and be very future forward thinking, you're going to have to make the investments. So
For us, it's about, you cannot design with boundaries anymore. So 16 by 9 formats and shapes and all this kind of stuff, they're gone. Like in the world of video and technology, there's no boundaries. So it's called architectural mapping now. So it's not just projecting onto it, it's also creating shapes. And like those LED squares, they're 3 inches wide, We can make continuous video that goes on for a mile. So never be confined into an aspect ratio. That's the future for us. So we can put video on every surface anywhere 24/7. So if you want that much video, or do it tastefully and, do none. So those are what we are looking into as we bring in new technologies for displaying video or manipulating it, or audio, how we utilize audio. So that's how we try to, there's no boundaries. And when you're doing spots even, we're confined by TV sets and mobile and, tablets and cell phones, and we're kind of stuck in this box. The cool thing about experiential is you're not stuck in the box, so you don't even have to. I don't know who remembers the TV show Dallas. And it was a great experiential spot that was done by an agency in New York where they were relaunching another series of this Dallas, the Ewing oil thing. They rented an old abandoned gas station in Manhattan. They dressed it up, they put Ewing oil on the banner outside. They put gas on sale for 95 cents and actually had gas in the tanks. They had lines around 10th Avenue of people queuing up, and the news trucks were there taking pictures. They got all this free marketing and all this free engagement because they had this cool idea to do this experiential thing by a phony gas station with real gas and sold it for 99 cents. And they got all this publicity out of it. And they did that virally. They released that whole thing virally. So those are the kind of experiential ideas, and then when you're looking at putting technology into those, you just got to do it, creatively and just go right ahead.
I was going to ask you, just finish off with, when you look at putting technology into those, have you ever experienced a brief or something where the experience would be better without technology?
Yes. Architects generally and designers want to limit, they want the building and the structure to be more influential. And this building is a good example of that because architecturally it was such a beautiful building, you didn't want to take away from that in any way. And I feel, even though I'm a technologist, I feel that less is more. It's more tasteful.
Yeah, if possible, you want the technology to be invisible, because when you think too much about it, it's going to take away from what you're really supposed to be focusing on. Museums, I think, do a great job of balancing the actual exhibit, the thing you've actually come to see, that artifact or that piece of hieroglyphics or such. The digital aspect is just an accoutrement to that. It should not take away from the overall experience.
And I think, and the museums are good examples, and we've done a few, they sometimes, when they put too much technology in a museum environment, years ago, I was born in Dublin, and years ago my grandfather worked at the Guinness plant. And if I wanted to go down to the Guinness plant, I would go walk the floor, and you'd be in the middle of all the hops and the barley and the copper tanks, and that's where you got your tour, and then you got a pint of Guinness. You could have been 4 or 5 years old. You still got a pint of Guinness at the end of the tour. But I took my kids back there a few years ago, and they had built this whole new stockhouse experience, and you kind of started at the Sky Bar, and you do this whole tour. And they ended up showing how do you put the Coopers manufacture oak barrels on a video screen embedded into the back of a barrel. It's like, so I'm standing there looking at an exhibit with a little 6-inch video screen, and you're looking at why don't you have a guy build a barrel? You know, it would be much more fun to me to have the actual person, you know, build a barrel down again, because it's, you know, and that it kind of lost it for me as far as, but it's probably the busiest tour museum route in the country, but to me it kind of lost a little bit of its nostalgia by replacing an actual person doing the work with, you know, a video of it.
Ain't nothing like the real thing.
It's like the real thing.
Oh, wow. We haven't gone back, so we'll go right in the middle.
Hey, so experiential design obviously is very visually impactful. I think that has a lot of implications for more things that the public could use, like pathfinding in cities, disseminating information on a large scale. So I'm wondering, in your experience, do you see these sorts of designs ever being implemented into urban infrastructures or within urban planning at some point in the future, or to any degree?
Definitely. Frank may have seen these as well, but I know, say, General Electric, for example, has a product they've rolled out where they're light posts, but they're solar powered, and they have these long screens also associated with them. They serve as Wi-Fi hotspots so that it can connect the entire city. I think they've installed these in San Diego already. But the screens themselves also display relevant information. There's wayfinding. I think there's maybe some weather and some other kind of, if there are big announcements, but it's very cool stuff. So it's wayfinding mixed with public safety, mixed with public internet access.
And I think that brings us to augmented reality, right? AR, because AR is going to be, as far as for a company like McCann, like, I'm sorry, but I don't have, I don't make cell phones, so I can't. But it's going to be taking on a lot of that responsibility. So when you augment reality, you open up your live camera, you put it up on Fifth Avenue or wherever you are, and it'll augment all the details of all the things that you need to see as you pan around. So I think that's a huge way that AR is being utilized over VR, because VR is a unique individual experience, so it's really only finding success in gaming more so than, because you can't share when you're in VR, you're on your own. So I think that's where urban is going to use a lot of this, pedestal type stuff where it's architecturally pleasing, and then moving a lot into the augmented reality side. But you have to have the keys, so you have to have all these widgets out there embedded into all of these locations. You just don't want to rely on the map information or Yelp's information. You really want to have good data so that the shop name or the storefront or where you are is real and not just an advertisement. So trust.
I know you talked earlier, someone had asked a question asking how do you keep your client excited for 5 years while you're working on your project? How do you all keep your team excited while working on these projects? Because that's a long time to be devoted to. But I mean, there has to be more than that.
No, there is. There's a lot more than that. You have to have people who love what they do, I've been taking TVs apart since I was like 14 years old, and I'm still doing it. So it doesn't matter to me if it's cool. Now, today, our company does a lot of consumer type work, our commodity type work. So we do a lot of conference facilities, colleges, schools. But this specialty work is my passion, so I'm kind of staying that. But every time I show up at the office with one of these projects, they all run for the hills because it's like, this is, going to take us years. But you have to just love it, and the people you hire have to love it.
That's key, absolutely, Frank. Also, not every project's going to last 5 years. Now, if you work in an agency, you better love the brand you're working on, because you may be working on it for 5, 10, or more years. But I think a big part of that is just varying the types of work you have. If you have a project that lasts 5 years, it's probably fairly well funded, which is great. So that means you might, or we as a company, try to make other initiatives that will keep people engaged, call a side project. Or if we have a chance to integrate a new trick that we've been working on into this project, just kind of slip it in, whether they know it or not. it'll enhance the project overall, but it's finally a chance to pull out that bag of tricks and make it your own. So things like that help, but I think just mix the different projects when you can. As a company, again, we try to do that where we have some that last 6 weeks and some that last 6 months and some that last 18 months. I'll get some, this gentleman up here.
A little while back, I remember a piece that you guys did an E3 for a game called Splinter that took basically the experience beyond the screen and developed the entire room for a trailer. What was kind of the inspiration of that piece? And do you possibly see gaming taking that stride in the future and really trying to take it that far outside of the VR thing, like you saw in earlier, a little bit more privatized? So in that situation, there was a lot more people didn't see it at once. Do you see that as a thing for the future for them, or has it kind of died off?
That was also an example of projection mapping, and their idea was, well, we have these massive LED screens. Actually, there was part projection. There was like a 16:9 screen that had 4 LED clusters underneath that, but no one there had kind of used the entire real estate of all those screens, and then mapping the proscenium, which is sort of it was a very decorative, it was the LA theater. So projection mapping that. It was a cool effect. It was more like just having explosions come off the screen, but that was for like a game trailer / demo. I would say augmented reality is really going to do that. While it's not quite a shared experience now, I mean, obviously people who play video games, they're all networked together. They have their headphones on and they're talking shit to the other guys who they're playing games with. So I think having that happen in a real world scenario where they can wander around this room and see something erupting out of the ceiling and coming at them. If you've ever seen the HoloLens, even demos of the Microsoft HoloLens, it's freaking amazing. It really works. Yeah, it's really that good. So I think that's what the future's going to be for sure.
Chad, I think 1 or 2 more.
Oh, 1 or 2 more?
Up in the back, you think you had a question in the back? No? There you go.
Yes, ma'am.
For the Nike project, where did Leviathan actually come in on that? So was that from Nike, did that idea come from Nike and Leviathan, and then you guys came in and did more of the build out, or did that idea actually come from you guys?
The beauty of that is there was no Leviathan involved. So we got to work directly with them. Nike is one of those brands that Leviathan's probably their primary agency of record, but they treat agencies like production companies in a lot of ways. Where they'll say, all right, we got an activation, who wants it? They're just gonna throw it out there to 5 groups and everyone's clawing for it because it's Nike. But everyone has to bid on it. No one has a guaranteed job for Nike again and again and again, except for maybe Leviathan. So that was direct to client, and I think the brief story I told earlier was, it was a 1-page brief that said, Snapchat, influencers, ready, set, go. And so what we wound up doing was nothing like that brief, which was also kind of neat. So sometimes you can push the boundaries, and sometimes clients get really scared of you. So, does that answer your question? Okay. So one more. Yes, sir.
You talk about like providing fail-safe and backup plans. When you guys are introducing new obstacle course or this bar, like how do you kind of preempt questions you think you're gonna get from the client about because you're introducing new ways to interact with stuff or new ways to look at stuff. How internally how do you vet that and how do you prepare for that new?
Well, it's managing expectations is our job on the hardware side and the development side. It's what can it do, how much does it cost? And whether it's this project where we were engaged first and then content guys came later, or it's the creatives that come first and then we come later, it's the customer understanding what the goal is, what the budget is, and if you're going to do redundancies and mission criticals and all this kind of stuff, especially if it's live events, you better have your budgets correct, because if you don't, you can't afford redundancies. And then when it does, not work, you don't have that mission critical redundant situation, and then the customer's going to be, yes, they actually said we didn't want redundancies, but now we do. So, okay, well, let's go do redundancies, right? So managing expectations is huge on this type of work. Going in what the budgets are, stick to your budgets. Don't be cheap and try to cut corners because you want to sell the job. Don't undersell it, because then you'll end up in trouble at the end of the day, and then the customer's not going to get what they want.
Yes, exactly. And also propose a solution for the specific challenge. If it's 6 weeks to build something, you want leading edge technology, it might be not be the best solution for it, because when you introduce cutting edge or bleeding edge, you got to test it again and again and again.
This is all 4K, and
Yes.
we're running 16 quad HD channels. So each HD channel, or each 4K channel is 4 HDs. So we're stitching 16 of those together. So we're trying to churn 4K at 60 hertz. Is that what we're using? So it's a lot of stuff to process. So that itself, that's cutting edge, right? Because nobody's doing a lot of that 4K on this type of display. So it's the first time it's been done. So it's challenging for us to get the hardware to be able to crunch this data and make it look smooth and effortless. So the customer has to understand that, and that's why, if that was just 4 HDs, then it would be easy to do. It would be, a third of the price. But because it's 4K, we have to be able to sell that and talk about it.
Let's all wish them good luck for the real openings of that.
They would actually